Welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye. I'm Dr. Kaye Wise Whitehead. I am so excited to be joined by saxophonist Earl Brooks, an assistant professor of English at UMBC, my alma mater. He's written a number of articles, including most recently, Charles Mingus, Rotary Perception and the Fables of Fathers. He's also wrote about Duke Ellington's melodies, and his current book project, Resonance of Resistance, The Rhetoric of Black Music, argues that there would be no Harlem Renaissance, no civil rights movement, or no Black arts movement as we know it without the phenomena of Black music. How are you, Professor Brooks?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I want to get right into it because when I think about the civil rights movement, and I want to be clear, I did not march in the civil rights movement. I am the daughter of a civil rights movement activist. When I look back at the history as someone who studied it, I look at the importance of music and the way that music was used, not just to uplift those who were struggling, but as a way to connect people together. So can you specifically talk about the use of, say, Negro spirituals or roots or R&B during the civil rights movement?
Most definitely. I have this phrase that I say to my students all the time, and if they're listening, they're probably gonna be shaking their heads because I say it almost every class period. And it's, what happened then is now. You know, what happened then is now. And what I mean by that is, as we celebrate our incredible progress as a nation when it comes to, social and legal histories of things like racial oppression, it's crucial that we understand how the threads of our current dilemmas are inextricably linked to the past, right? And when it comes to the union of Black music and Black social and political history, I always like to begin with thinking about W.E.B. Du Bois and his classic text, The Souls of Black Folk, right? And there's a passage in chapter 9, that chapter, I think is titled Of the Sons of Master and Man, right? And I've been thinking about this passage for a while, and he's describing that which was often thought but not said aloud, right? And he writes, about like what he thought folks who were, profiting from the institution of slavery were thinking. But he also wrote about what those slaves may have been thinking as well. And he has this line where he says, to be sure, behind the thought lurks the afterthought. Suppose, after all, the world is right and we are less than men. Suppose this mad impulse within us is all wrong, some mock mirage from the untrue, right? And I always go back to that passage because Du Bois understood how the power of music had to speak to those underlying thoughts, right? And we see the evidence of that belief in the passages of music that he includes in the book, right? And so therefore, like, what Du Bois gives us is this sense that any project for liberation has to have two struggles, right? There's the outward struggle, which is all the efforts of resistance, protesting, organizing, and so forth. And then there's that inward struggle, right? That wonders, is all our efforts in vain, right? Is this really going to work, right? And so what he gives us is a platform for really understanding how Black music speaks directly to that layer of emotion and psychology, right? And here at UMBC, I'm in the English department, but my field is rhetoric and composition, and we spend a lot of time thinking about and writing about how communication works and how people are persuaded, to take on particular beliefs or commit certain actions. And there's this idea that while we make, these valiant efforts to persuade the public or the people around us, we also have to persuade ourselves, right? And we have to trust that the narrative we use to see the world around us is accurate. So Black music has historically been a really important vehicle for that kind of persuasion, right? not in the sense that, listening to a particular artist or song is going to tell you what public policy to support or who to vote for, right? Especially when we're talking about music like jazz and other kinds of instrumental music where you may not have explicit lyrics, right? But it can compel a state of mind, right? One may need to feel like voting, right? Or to believe that voting matters, right? So I like to think of Black music as um, identity protection cognition, right? And it's this idea that relies on the notion of understanding Black music as a communal tradition, sort of like its own public sphere, right? Where certain relationships are built with certain sounds over time that accrue meaning, right? And artists like, Charles Mingus and Duke Ellington and Mary Lou Williams and, I could go on, but their music should be understood as contributing to public discourse and not just a passive reflection, right, of what was going on. And when we survey the history of Black music, we can identify these discursive patterns that emerge from the music and then echo throughout Black communities in really, really powerful ways.
Well, let me just ask you, as we're kind of thinking this through and going so deep into the history and even the construction of Black music, which I really appreciate. I know that this year marks the 65th anniversary of the Little Rock Nine, that work to integrate Little Rock High School. And when we think about the long history that comes along with that in terms of integration and in terms of the ways in which music pushed us forward, I think it ties into songs like We Shall Overcome or Wade in the Water or Change Gonna Come. When I'm thinking about, Sweet Honey in the Rock and the ways in which they led people forward. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important for young people to not just learn about the history, because you laid that out, but to learn the songs themselves and be able to pull them forward and sing them now?
So that's a great question. I think another thing that we take for granted is just how much the music of our current time celebrates the cultural characteristics that were once on the wrong side of respectability politics, right? So, like, for example, the celebrated Fisk Jubilee Singers, right? They were one of the first groups where you had moments of national exposure for Black music, right? And they were singing the spirituals, right? Except the theory that they, put into practice was, how could they demonstrate mastery of Western,
Right.
European performance traditions as a way to demonstrate, the humanity of African Americans, right? And it's a worthwhile contribution. It's an iconic contribution, but also provides context for grappling with the amount of stigma associated with Black folk traditions after the era of slavery, right? And it's so important that we understand that Black music has so much to do with overturning that internal paradigm, right? So that's one way I look at that.
Then how does that tie in? If I can pull it forward, because I think that one of the most exciting things about songs like Wade in the Water, for example, that I think about that as a Negro spiritual, and there's a whole history around why they're called Negro spirituals. I pull it forward into Wade in the Water with Sweet Honey in the Rock, but I pull it forward to today. Like, we can use that and we can use it as a foundation for, say, rap and hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little about the transition, how music has changed? It's still connected to us culturally and spiritually, but maybe the beat has changed or the words have changed, kind of how music has transitioned within our own community.
Yeah, I mean, there are roots that you can follow, right? Even in the music that's, contemporary to our moment, you can trace these roots back, right? And if you understand the history, you're able to do that in really, really powerful ways, kind of understand, oh, this is where this comes from. I think in the context of hip hop, right, we have, that kind of familiar joke with, like, when you have young folks who may be gravitating towards a particular song that's really popular right now, and not realizing that it's a sample,
Yes.
right, of a famous song, right? And then, maybe they just never heard the original song, right? But that phenomenon is so emblematic of the elasticity of Black music, right? And that it can always um, remake itself, yet remain tethered to a particular history, right? So that's the kind of stuff I love to talk with students about and explore in really meaningful ways. And then another way that I think about your question too is, and I would love to just shout this from the rooftops. It's like, we cannot just value, Black music and Black history just within the sphere of like Black studies. Like, this stuff has really, really, really crucial gems that we need to deal with a range of our most current dilemmas impacting all, us right now, right? And, when I think of um, folks like Du Bois and what he wrote about the spirituals, and how that was so crucial in his, ability to kind of make a case for the interior lives of Black folks. When I think of stuff like climate change, and we just had the massive hurricane damage in Florida and all these issues, I think about how urgent it is for young people to understand that you need something, you need a foundation to plug into to deal with those same underlying questions of uncertainty, right? Because I think there's an unacknowledged stream of thought that's like, what if our efforts for, dealing with climate change are too late, right? Or what if these efforts are in vain, right? And so when we look to uh, these portions of history and these traditions, especially around those with concerning Black music, you need a source of motivation to tap into, right? You need something that will um, propel you forward in the face of the naysayers, in the face of bad public policy, all of that stuff. So, if there's one thing that I want to stress to listeners is, that Black music, Black history, this stuff is relevant for the problems that we are grappling with today, right? Um, so,
Well, let me ask you.
it's such an
So,
important question.
but just I want to connect it back though, because I was thinking as you were talking, in terms of how music has evolved. That if I go back and I listen to my parents' music, right, the Tina Turner and Ike Turner, like that's who they were. The Tina Turner was my era. Tina Turner and Ike Turner, that was my parents. And I go back and I think about my grandparents' music and the way music has evolved. And then when I was coming up as a 90s baby, being told more often than not that rap was a CNN of the ghetto, right? That's what we were told. If you want to know what's happening in the inner city, listen to rap music. But rap music back then, it was about, don't push me, I'm close to the edge, and we've got to stay together, and how can we make money, and how do we organize our community. And rap music today is like drugs. It's about women, it's about getting paid. Does the change in the lyrics indicate a change in where our focus for work is within the Black community? How does the music speak directly to what we should be focused on?
That's a tricky question because, you have to account for the force of the music industry and the market of the music industry in terms of what people actually get to hear and what gets played on the radio and what becomes popular. And is that a real reflection of, what's selling right now, or is that a real reflection of what people are actually feeling and thinking on a day-to-day basis, right? And I don't think I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, but it's a murky question.
Mm-hmm.
um, and when I look at how all of the, all of our celebrated scholars have dealt with contemporary music. Folks like, um, Mark Anthony Neal and Guthrie Ramsey and a host of other, Black scholars who are putting out a lot of great research on Black music in general. What we see right now is really, really important questions about um, community, family, uh, what kinds of values we really hold as important, right? And uh, how are young folks really reckoning with, you know, a new generation coming into being and taking on leadership positions in our society. And for hip hop, I think it's really interesting to look at the trajectory of someone like Jay-Z, who you definitely couldn't frame as just one thing or, about one particular theme in hip hop, but somebody who really embodies all these different strands of thought, and you see the evolution of his music as becoming more and more driven by larger questions about the health and well-being of the Black community. And I think that's a trend you can see with a lot of other uh, rap artists who have had the benefit of um, uh, we can see their music evolve over time. So the thing I always think about, with that question is where will things go from here, and what kinds of evolution will we see? Not just in terms of like how the music sounds and the sonics involved with that, which I'm always passionate and interested in that, but also with how more urgent concerns that face the community writ large find their way back into the music. And I think you can see that if you're looking for it, you can see it.
Let me ask you, there's a history of politicians kind of at key moments trying to embody the spirit of the Black community through song. I think about, I don't know, President Barack Obama singing Amazing Grace at the funeral service, or former Mayor Stephanie Rollins Blake from Baltimore City singing that kind of Amazing Grace kind of spiritual at a funeral as well. Can you talk a little bit about these moments? I mean, they're powerful in imagery. I'm just not sure about the connection to our deep struggle when that happens. Is it embodied by the politician, so it's a great photogenic moment, or really is it a way of connecting us deeper to our individual and collective struggle?
I think it could be both. Uh, you know, we always have to be aware of how, uh, these cultural traditions can be manipulated or used for unethical purposes, right? Or just the means to convince folks that, you are in touch with the community or aware of certain things. We do have to be aware of that, but I don't think that awareness should dilute um, our efforts to value those moments, because they are important. And I think it is important that we have, leaders in our community make those connections to our history. But we always have to keep an eye on the larger rhetorical landscape, right? And, are their efforts matched by their actions, right? And that can tell us a lot about how to read those moments for authenticity.
So, in my last question to you, I want us just to connect back to the anniversary of Little Rock Nine and the work that you studied with Charles Mingus, Fables of Fathers, definitely based upon a governor of Arkansas who refused to acknowledge the Supreme Court's decision to support school integration back in 1954 with the Brown v. Board of Education case. Can you talk a little bit about how you teased out kind of the channeled anger and frustration of the Black community coming through Charles Mingus's music and coming through the work that you studied and wrote about?
Yeah, I love that song because it kind of lives on the boundaries of, kind of this um, spirit of satire, and then also this spirit of like great sadness, right? And if, when you hear, uh, you know, when you see from the beginning to the end of the song, you get so many different emotional colors. And I think it does such a great job of capturing that moment of, and I think for, for Mingus and for musicians living and working at that time, it had to be so surreal to see, state politicians, state leaders, directly challenge, the federal government in such strident ways that, Black folks would have, we would never have dared to do those kinds of things, right? You never felt that kind of privilege to directly challenge the federal government like that. So I think that the song captures so many different meanings in terms of what was happening at that time, and what it meant to think really critically about how to move forward. Um, and in that particular article that you referenced, I talk a lot about how Mingus thought about music, right? And how he thought about rhythm as not something strictly linear, but something that could be circular, right? And that there was always a eye on returning to the past as a way of looking to the future, right? And I think that was a really great way that he kind of conceptualized, um, music composition and the way that he approached writing music that would speak to, the events that he was witnessing, happening in the nation. And I think that song holds a really, really important lesson for us now when it comes to thinking about how we look to the past to imagine a way forward, right? So I think there's a really, really great bridge you can build between, the technicalities of music composition and the need to make really, really important pragmatic decisions in our current moment.
Well, thank you very much. Saxophonist Earl Brooks is an assistant professor of English at UMBC. His current book project, The Resonance of Resistance, The Rhetoric of Black Music, argues that there would be no Harlem Renaissance, no civil rights movement, or a Black arts movement without this phenomenon we call Black music. Professor Brooks, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And folks, this is Today with Dr. K. I'm Dr. Kaye Whitehead. Stay with us.